Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking a kind of a psychological X-ray. Really, we're going to be examining the outer limits of human behavior.
That's a good way to put it.
We're mapping two, fundamentally different psychological landscapes. On one side, we have the qualities that can push people toward the darker, more manipulative aspects of personality.
The traits that make life difficult for, well, everyone around them.
Exactly. And then on the flip side, we have the light, the positive traits that really define human goodness and our capacity for connection.
That's right. But our mission today isn't just about, putting people in good and bad boxes. We want to connect those personality blueprints to the very beginning of human connection.
You mean back to childhood?
All the way back. How our earliest, our most foundational relationships, that bond we form with a parent, how that sets the pattern for the love and intimacy we seek decades later as adults.
It's a massive deep dive then into this duality of self and connection.
It is. We're unpacking the models that define who we are. Personality, values, and how we connect, which is all about attachment theory.
And we're going to try and give you a clear, understandable map of these psychological territories.
Right. We'll identify the specific characteristics that define a dark versus a light disposition. And some of the links are, well, they're surprising.
And most importantly, right, we want to clarify what parts of your childhood really stick with you in romantic love and maybe which parts you have the power to change.
That's the goal.
That sounds like a powerful mission. Let's dive in.
Let's do it.
So let's start on the shady side of the street. Let's examine these qualities that, even in small doses, can make relationships and, work environments really difficult.
And when we talk about dark traits, it's important to say we're usually talking about characteristics that exist on a spectrum.
Right. We're not talking about full-blown clinical disorders here.
No, not at all. These are what we call subclinical traits. They're characteristics present in a lot of otherwise healthy, functioning people. But when someone scores high on them, it gives them this very distinct, often exploitative way of interacting with the world.
That's a really crucial distinction, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when we talk about, say, narcissism, we're not necessarily talking about someone who meets the clinical diagnosis for narcissistic personality disorder.
Exactly. We're talking about someone who scores high on measures of self-absorption, of entitlement. But they're functional. They hold jobs, they have relationships, but their inner machinery is just fundamentally oriented towards self-maximization.
This concept, which has become so popular in recent years, it started as the dark triad, right? 3 traits.
It did. But the research has really refined and expanded that grouping to 4 closely related traits, which has established what we now call the dark tetrad.
The tetrad, so 4.
Yes. The 4 components are narcissism, Machiavellism, psychopathy, and the most recent addition, sadism. And these traits, while they are distinct, they all share a common thread: a core lack of empathy and a willingness to prioritize their own goals above the feelings or well-being of anyone else.
Okay, let's start with narcissism. That's probably the most recognizable term. People use it all the time, but I think they often confuse it with just being confident.
That's a common mistake.
Yeah.
But the traits here are much deeper and more persistent than just confidence.
So what are we talking about specifically?
When we define narcissism in this context, we're looking at a massive egotism, a persistent claim to authority, arrogance, boastfulness. But crucially, there's a strong manipulative streak.
A sense of entitlement.
A huge ingrained sense of entitlement. This belief that they deserve special treatment, admiration, privileges, and it doesn't matter what they've actually achieved, they just see themselves as inherently superior.
And you mentioned the distinction from the full personality disorder. It's really just a matter of degree.
It is. Narcissistic personality disorder is the extreme end. It's characterized by very specific criteria, like a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, a genuine lack of empathy, frequent envy, consistently arrogant behaviors that really disrupt their ability to maintain stable relationships.
But the subclinical version shares those things, just.
Yeah.
The person can still navigate life without a complete breakdown.
Exactly. They have just enough social dexterity to get by.
Okay, here's the part that confuses a lot of people. If narcissism involves all this arrogance and entitlement, you'd think those traits would be repulsive, right?
You would think so.
Yet the findings suggest the opposite. Despite this generally antisocial nature, narcissism often appears highly attractive to other people, especially at first.
It's a profound paradox. The research is pretty clear that when men score high in narcissism, they're chosen significantly more often for subsequent dates.
So why is that?
It's because in short interactions, their behavior is often mistaken for something else. It's seen as confidence, high self-esteem, social dominance.
They have a kind of charisma.
They do. The sheer self-assurance and the boastfulness, initially it's read as competence and status, and that exerts a really strong positive effect on partner attraction. They walk into a room, they command attention, and that magnetism just it overrides the subtle warning signs of that deep self-focus.
So in the short term, the arrogance actually sells itself as charisma, which makes them seem desirable, even if the long-term reality is, well, difficult.
Precisely. They are excellent at presenting a glossy, high-status facade, which is what a lot of people are initially looking for in a partner.
Okay. Moving on to the second element of the tetrad, we have Machiavellism. This one feels purely strategic, colder. It's less about vanity and more about calculation, isn't it?
Machiavellism is the absolute epitome of cold calculation. It's defined by three core beliefs that kind of form this cohesive worldview.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, they have a core belief in the effectiveness of manipulation. They just think that tactics like lying, flattery, cunning, they think that stuff works.
And the second?
A deeply cynical view of human nature. They believe that everyone else is fundamentally selfish or weak or stupid.
So they believe they're the only rational actor in a world full of fools.
And that leads right to the third point. Their consistent focus is on maximizing personal utility. That is the ultimate principle that guides every single action.
So they're only ever interested in what benefits them.
Always. They treat every situation like a cold calculation where people are just their tools or their obstacles to be managed. They are patient, long-term schemers, which is different from the often impulsive narcissists.
That's an interesting distinction. Does that long-term strategic nature show up differently in different people?
It does, and some findings suggest there's a gendered expression. For men, a high score in Machiavellism actually correlates positively with long-term planning. They use this cynical worldview to engineer their future success.
Seeing careers and relationships like chess pieces.
Exactly. But for women, that same correlation with long-term planning is negative.
Oh, that's interesting. Why?
Well, it suggests the trait might express itself in more immediate tactical ways, perhaps focusing on exploiting immediate social situations rather than some structured, decade-long strategy.
Okay, the third member of the classic triad is psychopathy. What's the key characteristic here that separates it from Machiavellian coldness and narcissism's ego?
Psychopathy introduces the most dangerous element, which is a profound lack of emotional depth and impulse control.
This is where aggression comes in.
A very specific kind of aggression. Psychopathy shows the strongest link to what's called proactive aggression.
Proactive, meaning planned.
Planned or instrumental aggression. It's used explicitly to achieve a goal. It's not reactive aggression, which is just, lashing out when you're frustrated. This is cold and deliberate.
I find it fascinating that we see such a clear separation here in terms of behavior.
It's a critical finding. Both psychopathy and Machiavellism link strongly to that proactive aggression. But, and this is notable, narcissism shows no connection to it at all.
So a narcissist might boast or manipulate to get attention.
Right, but they generally aren't planning to physically harm or strategically attack someone to seize a resource in that cold, calculated way a high-scoring psychopath might.
So the summary profile for psychopathy is?
A profound lack of empathy, coupled with increased risk-taking behavior and just a general tendency toward aggression. They feel little to no guilt.
Okay, so we have narcissism, vanity, and entitlement, Machiavellianism, cold calculation and cynicism, and psychopathy, emotional coldness, and instrumental aggression.
And finally, rounding out the framework to the full dark tetrad, we have sadism.
This was the later addition.
Yes, it's the one researchers identified as an essential component to complete the picture. It explicitly defines the pleasure derived from inflicting pain or suffering on others.
And that pain can be psychological, right? Not just physical.
Oh, absolutely. It could be bullying, humiliating someone, or emotionally tormenting them for sheer enjoyment. It's not just using people as tools, it's actually enjoying their pain as a reward in itself.
That is a heavy list. That combination, the tetrad, represents a powerful, persistent force in the population that's dedicated to self-gain, often heedless of the cost to others.
Indeed. It's a profile dedicated to the self and to external validation, almost always at the expense of others. It helps us understand why certain behaviors, from, corporate malfeasance to social cruelty, are so persistent, even among seemingly successful integrated individuals.
Okay, if the dark tetrad maps the worst of human nature on this subclinical level, then the light triad stands as its positive counterpoint. It's kind of refreshing to turn the lens onto the qualities that make us human and capable of connection.
It is.
But is this light triad just another word for, being nice?
It's far more complex and robust than just niceness. The light triad is defined by three interconnected qualities that reflect a deeply positive orientation toward both yourself and other people.
What are those qualities?
It's positively correlated with genuine compassion, high levels of empathy, a fundamental acceptance of others, and this deep-seated belief that people in general and oneself are inherently good. They just approach the world with a stance of hope and reciprocity.
We noted earlier that the dark personality tends to correlate with younger age and male gender. Do the light traits align with the opposite demographics?
They do. The light personality correlates positively with the female gender and, interestingly, with higher age.
So we get nicer as we get older.
The data suggests that maturity and life experience may genuinely temper some of those darker inclinations and enhance these positive pro-social traits.
What else does it correlate with?
It correlates strongly with low unpredictability in childhood, higher levels of religiosity or spirituality, and, not surprisingly, overall general life satisfaction. They feel better because they expect better from the world.
That sounds almost idyllic. But you mentioned there's a nuance here, a shadow of lightness. When you have such high levels of compassion and empathy, does that sensitivity come with a cost in the real world?
It absolutely can. And this is a critical insight for anyone who identifies as being highly empathetic. People who score highly on the light triad are strongly correlated with something called interpersonal guilt.
Interpersonal guilt.
They worry excessively about the feelings and needs of others. And they develop guilt very, very quickly if they perceive they have somehow failed to meet those needs.
So they're constantly monitoring their own behavior to make sure they haven't offended someone or overlooked somebody.
Exactly. And while this sensitivity makes them excellent friends, deeply supportive partners, and conscientious colleagues, that emotional load can put them at a disadvantage in professional or competitive settings.
Because their niceness gets in the way.
Their niceness, or their unwillingness to prioritize their own self-interest over the group's harmony, means they might fail to advocate for themselves. They might avoid a necessary confrontation or constantly navigate these internal conflicts because they're afraid they've wronged someone.
So they might get passed over for a promotion because they're not willing to step on anyone's toes?
Yeah, that's a perfect real-world example. It's a powerful illustration of the challenge of profound goodness.
Okay, let's try to integrate this duality, the dark tetrad and the light triad, into the bigger picture of personality structure. We can use the established Exaco personality model as a kind of map.
Right. The Exaco model gives us a 6-dimension structure: honesty, humility, emotionality, extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. The dark traits align very clearly against the positive dimensions. It shows us exactly where the machinery breaks down.
And it seems like the core conflict is rooted in the traits related to getting along with others and being responsible.
Correct. Agreeableness shows the most substantial negative correlations with the dark tetrad.
And agreeableness is basically a person's capacity for cooperation and kindness.
Cooperation, kindness, sympathy, exactly. The darker you are, the less agreeable you are. We see that psychopathy is the most adversarial here. If you meet someone highly agreeable, they're statistically almost guaranteed not to score high in psychopathy.
And Machiavellianism.
Close behind. Calculative, cynical people just aren't cooperative. Narcissism is also negatively correlated, but less strongly.
Why less strongly?
It suggests a narcissist can be charmingly agreeable when it serves their ego. They can turn it on.
And if someone is trying to exploit others, they must also often lack consistent self-control, which brings us to conscientiousness.
Right. Conscientiousness is about being organized, dependable, disciplined, goal-oriented. We see clear negative associations here, too, specifically with the cold, calculating traits.
So Machiavellianism and psychopathy again.
Yes. The manipulative individual and the impulsive risk-taker are often less inherently dependable or self-controlled in a structured way. Their goals are often immediate and instrumental. They lack the persistence that high conscientiousness requires.
So when we synthesize all of this, what does this entire profile high-dark tetrad scores? What does that generally predict about someone's life focus?
Overall, the dark personality correlates negatively with general life satisfaction, and also with values focused on others' welfare, what we often call self-transcendence values.
And what does it correlate positively with?
High dark trait scores correlate positively with behaviors like a strong power motive, a desire to influence and dominate. They're also highly linked to instrumental sex.
Meaning using sex for non-intimate goals, like status or power.
Exactly. We also see links to a high performance orientation, conspicuous consumption, buying things to show off wealth and status, and just pure egoism.
It sounds like a life philosophy that's entirely dedicated to acquiring external validation and resources. Like life is a zero-sum game they have to win at all costs.
Precisely. Their focus is always outward, seeking validation and control rather than inward, seeking growth or deep connection.
This brings us naturally to values. Personality defines how we act, but values define why we act. So if we can understand someone's core values, we get at their motivation.
And this is where things get really counterintuitive.
Let's set the context first. There's a model of human values. Let's quickly define a few key ones. What's universalism?
Universalism is defined by these big, expansive values. Things like tolerance, wisdom, social justice, equality, a world at peace, protecting the environment, broad, global concerns.
Okay, then there's benevolence.
Benevolence is more focused on your inner circle. It's about preserving and enhancing the welfare of people you interact with frequently, being helpful, honest, forgiving, loyal to your family and community.
And finally, tradition.
Which is pretty straightforward. Respect for and acceptance of customs and ideas developed by traditional cultures or religions.
Okay, now let's look at the correlation findings between the dark and light personalities and these values, and prepare for some cognitive dissonance, because this data really challenges some deeply held assumptions.
It really does.
You'd assume that the dark personality, being so dedicated to self-advancement, would be highly correlated with power and achievement, right? Striving for success at all costs.
And this is where the surprise lands. The findings show the exact opposite. The dark personality is actually negatively correlated with the value of power and achievement.
Wait, I have to stop you there. That seems impossible. If they are so ego-driven, why would they not value power and achievement?
It forces us to redefine what power means to them. Our interpretation is that because the dark tetrad traits are associated with impulsivity, risk-taking, and cynicism, they often lack the long-term emotional and behavioral discipline needed to highly value structured achievement.
Like slowly climbing the corporate ladder.
Or dedicating years to a difficult goal. They prefer immediate, manipulative gratification, a fast win achieved through cunning rather than a hard-earned one. Their power is local and immediate, not systemic and long-term.
That makes sense. The kind of person who schemes to get someone else fired, rather than putting in the work to outcompete them fairly.
Exactly. The dark personality seeks control, but not necessarily responsibility, and formal achievement often comes with immense responsibility.
Okay, but here's the real head-scratcher. The dark personality is positively correlated with universalism.
I know.
Why would someone cynical and self-serving care about world peace or social justice? A Machiavellian supporting tolerance feels like a massive contradiction.
This is a profound puzzle. It requires a few different interpretive lenses. The high correlation suggests that people high in these traits sometimes endorse these virtuous global values, but perhaps without any genuine internal commitment.
So what are the possible whys for that?
There are three main possibilities suggested by behavioral science. First, instrumental usage.
They use it as a tool.
Exactly. If an organization or a social group holds social justice as a core value, adopting that stance, even superficially, grants them social desirability. It allows them to claim a moral high ground that disguises their self-serving behaviors.
They weaponize virtue signaling. It's a convenient cloak of moral superiority.
Yes. The second possibility is intellectual distance. Universalism deals with abstract, distant problems, world peace, environmental protection. Endorsing these values costs them nothing in their immediate personal life.
But benevolence would cost them something.
Right. Benevolence demands immediate, costly sacrifice for close relationships, which they avoid. It's easy to care about abstract justice in a country you don't live in, but it's hard to care about your neighbor who needs help moving furniture.
I see. So the greater the physical and emotional distance from the problem, the safer it is for them to hold the virtuous position.
And third, there's projection. People high in dark traits often see the world as corrupt and unfair because they are corrupt and unfair. They may unconsciously project their own cynicism onto the systems around them.
So they advocate for radical social change, not out of genuine empathy, but out of a cynical rejection of the existing power structures.
Exactly. They view the world as needing fixing because it's not yet serving them optimally.
That's incredibly insightful. And the light personality just flips the script entirely. People high on the light triad are actually positively correlated with the value of power, yet negatively correlated with universalism and benevolence. That seems totally backward for people who are supposed to be compassionate.
We have to apply the same nuanced thinking here. Look at that positive correlation with power. For a light personality, seeking power isn't about dominance over others.
What is it about then?
It refers to the motivation for competence, mastery, and independence. They want the ability to stand on their own 2 feet so they can fully express their compassionate self and help others from a stable position.
So they want the power to be good and effective, not the power to dominate.
Precisely. Their desire for power is the desire for efficacy. Now consider their negative correlation with benevolence and universalism. Remember the shadow of lightness, that interpersonal guilt?
Right, they feel overwhelmed.
Exactly. These individuals may feel overwhelmed by the intense demands of close relationships, which is benevolence, or the expansive, unsolvable problems of the world, which is universalism.
So the negative correlation might be a kind of coping mechanism.
It's a mechanism to manage the emotional burden. They value inner goodness, but the outward act of constant demanding care can be emotionally crushing. If they de-emphasize benevolence and universalism, they protect themselves from chronic guilt and emotional exhaustion,
And they focus instead on their own moral compass.
which is reflected in their positive correlation with independence and mastery. The data shows personality isn't just about what you are, but how you manage this tension between self-interest and the overwhelming demands of the world.
And we can see this duality expressed even in the choice of career paths people make.
Absolutely. Findings from a large study comparing students in different academic tracks reveal some stark differences in their core motivations. The sample compared students in business and law programs, those pursuing psychology degrees, and a neutral comparison group.
And that power drive we just discussed,
Yeah.
it seems to manifest really strongly in those competitive fields.
It does. The most salient finding was the motivation driving the business and law students. Compared to both the psychology students and the neutral students, the business law group strived the most for power.
So their academic choice seems directly aligned with a desire for influence, control, and material mastery. They choose fields that formalize power structures.
That's right. Conversely, the psychology students showed a remarkably different profile, one focused on deep interpersonal quality.
How so?
The psychology students scored significantly higher on a dimension called child-appropriate responsiveness than both the business law group and the neutral group.
Child-appropriate responsiveness. That sounds like a parenting measure.
It is often used that way. It measures the ability and willingness to engage actively and sensitively with another individual's needs, demonstrating deep interpersonal empathy.
So their choice of major might not just be intellectual curiosity about the mind. It might reflect a deeply ingrained difference in the value they place on emotional connection and understanding the subtleties of human interaction.
That's what the study suggests. Their motivation seems to be rooted in connection, while the business and law students' motivation is rooted in control. It just shows how our internal values can dictate the entire pathway of our lives.
Okay, we've mapped the internal landscape of the self, from the dark strategist to the compassionate healer. Now let's pivot and see how that internal self navigates the critical need for intimacy.
How does the person high in Machiavellianism or the one struggling with interpersonal guilt, how do they approach love?
Exactly. And this is where attachment theory comes in, drawing a psychological line from the cradle right to your current relationship.
The foundational idea here is that close relationships remain vitally important throughout our entire lives. The dynamic of seeking comfort and safety that defines the early parent-child bond, that search for a secure base, it just transitions in adulthood to the bond we form with a romantic partner.
Which is why the patterns established so early on feel so persistent.
They do.
This entire field began with observing infants in a very specific controlled environment. Tell us about the method that kicked off this whole framework.
That would be the strange situation. It was a standardized procedure developed for observing 1-year-olds back in the 1970s.
And what did it involve?
It involves a sequence of separation and reunion episodes with the primary caregiver in a laboratory setting. The child experiences escalating stress when the caregiver leaves and a stranger enters, and the researchers observe the child's reaction when the caregiver comes back.
And observing that reunion reaction was the key.
Absolutely. Did the child seek comfort immediately and calm down quickly? That defined the secure type.
What about the others?
Did they become highly distressed and then struggle to be soothed? Maybe clinging while also pushing the parent away? That was anxious ambivalent.
And the third type?
Or did they actively ignore or avoid the caregiver upon their return, treating the parent almost like a stranger? That was avoidant. That brief observation defined the blueprint.
It seems pretty ambitious to take observations of one-year-olds and apply them to complex adult romance. How did researchers make that leap?
Well, in the 1980s, researchers proposed that the same underlying classification system could be applied directly to adult romantic relationships. They developed surveys that captured the descriptions adults use for their own relationships.
And those descriptions mirrored the infant behaviors.
They did. For example, an avoidant adult might describe a discomfort with intimacy and an extreme need for self-reliance. An anxious adult might describe a desperate need for closeness and a fear of being abandoned.
And what do they find in terms of how common these styles were? Did most adults end up secure?
They found a striking and consistent distribution that mirrored the original childhood findings. Secure attachment was consistently the most common relationship pattern, characterizing about 56% of adults.
And the insecure styles?
They were split roughly, with about 19% identifying as anxious ambivalent, often called preoccupied in adults, and about 25% as avoidant.
Which suggests that whatever blueprint we form in childhood, it maintains a relatively stable prevalence across the population decades later.
It does. But the simple, secure, anxious avoidant triad didn't quite capture the full complexity of adult relationships.
And needed refinement.
Yes, because adults have a greater capacity for reflection and self-concept. So Bartholomew introduced the four-category model. It uses two essential internal dimensions to define the adult styles.
And those dimensions give a more nuanced view of why people behave the way they do.
Exactly. The first is the internal model of self-heartening. Do you see yourself as worthy of love, which is positive, or flawed, which is negative?
And the second.
The internal model of others, do you see other people as trustworthy and available, which is positive, or unreliable and critical, which is negative?
That model really clarifies the root of the insecurity. Let's walk through the four combinations quickly, because they're incredibly powerful tools for self-understanding.
Okay. First, secure. This is the ideal balance, a positive model of self and a positive model of others. These individuals are comfortable with both intimacy and autonomy.
They seek connection but don't panic when they're separated. They're grounded.
Right. Second, anxious ambivalent or preoccupied. This is a negative model of self, but a positive model of others.
So they see others as the source of security, but because they believe they're flawed, they're hypervigilant and deeply afraid of abandonment.
Exactly. They crave intimacy desperately. Third, dismissing avoidant. This is a positive model of self, but a negative model of others.
High self-esteem, independent. But they reject deep intimacy because they see others as unreliable or too needy.
They dismiss the importance of emotional connection. And finally, fearful avoidant. This is the most complex style. Negative self, negative other.
They want closeness, but are terrified of being hurt.
Right. They simultaneously desire and fear intimacy. They distrust their own worthiness and the reliability of their partner. They often approach and then retreat in this cycle.
Understanding those four styles really offers a clear map of potential relationship dynamics. So the question becomes, do people just randomly mix these styles, or do they seek out a similar level of security in a partner?
There's a very clear pattern. It's known as assortative mating, and it suggests an unconscious preference for familiarity. Adults tend to choose partners who share their attachment security level.
So secure people pair with secure people, and insecure people pair with other insecure people.
Generally, yes.
I would assume this is driven by initial attraction. A secure person looks for the stability they understand, and an avoidant person looks for the space they crave.
That's certainly a big part of it. Initial partner selection preferences often guide us toward what feels safe or familiar, even if that familiar pattern is unhealthy.
But there's another possibility.
Interestingly, yes. Research suggests that partners might actually adjust their security level over time within the relationship to become more similar to one another.
Oh, wow. So you can become more secure by being with a secure partner?
You can. Or, conversely, a secure person might become slightly more anxious if they're consistently paired with a fearful avoidant partner. The relationship itself reinforces the pattern, whether it's secure or insecure.
The core assumption of attachment theory, that the parent-child relationship acts as the definitive model for adult romance. It's powerful, but our analysis suggests the story of continuity is far less linear than we might think.
Right. If it were a perfect model, your mother's behavior when you were 5 would directly dictate your anxiety about your partner when you're 30. But the data points to a far more hopeful, less predetermined journey.
To understand what transfers, we first have to look at the details of those early bonds. You mentioned data where adults reflect on their childhoods.
Yes, and the findings consistently confirmed traditional parenting roles. Mothers were generally rated more positively than fathers across several key emotional dimensions.
Which emotional dimensions did mothers excel in?
Mothers were consistently judged higher in emotional acceptance, that feeling of being genuinely loved and accepted, and also in spending more time with the child and giving more physical affection, like cuddling or hugging.
Which reflects the traditional gender roles of the participants' upbringing.
Exactly. The mother was often the primary provider of that generalized emotional warmth and proximity.
But there was a key dimension where both parents were rated equally.
Yes, and this is highly significant. Both mothers and fathers were rated equally on the dimension of child-appropriate responsiveness.
That's the one that measures the quality of the engagement, not just the quantity.
Right. It's the parent's ability and willingness to tune into the child's specific needs in the moment and respond appropriately, not just offer general affection. And on that critical, high-quality engagement, both parents were equal.
Now, for the critical question of continuity, if that early bond is so crucial, how stable is it over time? Is the blueprint set in stone by age 1?
The answer is complex. While continuity definitely exists in early childhood, longitudinal data kind of throws cold water on the idea of a rigid, lifelong determination. For instance, the attachment style measured in a baby at age 1 does not significantly correlate with their attachment representation measured later at age 16.
That is a fundamental challenge to the idea of rigid determination, isn't it?
Yeah.
It suggests a child who is classified as avoidant in this strange situation can absolutely shift to a secure representation by the time they're a teenager.
Precisely. It indicates that changes in the internal working model are absolutely possible as we grow and interact with new environments, new relationships, and develop new cognitive abilities.
So the blueprint isn't etched in granite.
It's written in sand that can be reshaped.
This suggests that the adult relationship, therefore, isn't just a simple copy-paste of the childhood bond, which leads us to the most important finding of this entire section. We need to know what doesn't transfer so we can focus on what does.
That finding is cemented by a specific correlational analysis. It compared detailed dimensions of the childhood bond with adult partner anxiety and avoidance. They tested 26 detailed links between specific parental behaviors and adult attachment outcomes.
26 different links, and what was the outcome?
The vast majority, 23 of them, were non-significant.
Wow, that is hugely important.
It is. It means that the adult relationship is not a direct continuation of every nuanced detail of the early parent bond. The specific daily actions, the amount of time spent, the amount of physical affection, the behavioral mechanics of parenting, they simply did not predict the adult attachment style decades later.
So we can stop fixating on whether our parent hugged us enough or if we got enough attention. Those specific behaviors didn't seem to seal our fate.
Correct. The focus has to shift from the mechanics to the emotions.
So what does matter?
The few significant correlations we found point to 3 critical emotional factors that carry forward. These factors focus on emotional experience and expression, not just behavioral history.
Okay, factor 1, the power of maternal emotional acceptance.
Yes. A high feeling of being loved and accepted by your mother correlated significantly and negatively with partner avoidance in adulthood.
So if you felt emotionally accepted by your mother, if you felt unconditionally loved, valued, and seen, you were significantly less likely to be avoidant of intimacy in your adult romantic relationships.
That's it. It underscores the power of a foundational feeling of worthiness rather than the mechanical aspects of care.
That feeling of being worthy of love is the shield against avoiding love later in life.
It is the secure base that allows you to tolerate the inevitable vulnerability of adult intimacy. If you fundamentally feel worthy of love, you don't have to dismiss others to protect yourself.
And the other 2 factors are centered entirely around a skill that can actually be acquired: emotional openness.
Yes. The second and third critical links involve emotional openness, which is defined as the adult's ability to speak openly and clearly about their feelings regarding their childhood experiences.
The ability to tell a coherent story about your past.
Exactly. High scores on this scale correlated significantly negatively with both adult partner avoidance and partner anxiety.
That is a revelation. It's not just what happened to you when you were 7, but how well you can articulate and reflect on those experiences decades later. The capacity for clear emotional processing dictates adult security.
This is the core evidence for hope and change. The ability to be coherent and reflective, to express your emotional landscape clearly without getting overwhelmed or shutting down. It mitigates the formation of insecure adult styles. The person who can openly process their past tends to be less anxious and less avoidant in their current relationships, regardless of the classification they might have received as a baby.
So what's the broader conclusion here? Is the path from childhood bond to adult love predetermined, or is it a matter of emotional competence?
The data strongly suggests it is not rigidly determined by the specific style you acquired in childhood. Instead, adult attachment is influenced by specific emotional components. That foundational feeling of maternal acceptance and, crucially, the individual's capacity for clear emotional expression.
Which highlights that emotional capacity, which is a skill that can be developed and refined, plays a far greater role than any rigid historical classification.
And that adult relationships, therefore, have a significant capacity for restructuring the bond rather than just reinforcing old patterns. The work we do on ourselves can genuinely rewrite the script.
This deep dive has spanned the entire spectrum of human psychology, from the cold calculation of Machiavellianism and the self-focus of narcissism, where motivation is driven by immediate control and external validation.
All the way to the overwhelming compassion of the light triad, where the greatest struggle is managing the burden of interpersonal guilt.
And we connected all of that internal landscape to our external search for love.
And while research confirms that attachment styles show stability in adulthood, meaning if you are generally secure at 21, you're likely to be secure at 52, the most influential factors carried from childhood aren't the specific behaviors you experienced.
But rather those two emotional capacities, the profound feeling of being accepted and the vital skill of emotional openness.
That is the foundation upon which secure adult love is built.
The key takeaway here feels like empowerment. Your destiny in love isn't sealed by a childhood categorization or by the details of your parents' specific actions. The greatest predictor of security in your adulthood is your present-day capacity for coherent emotional reflection.
Which leads us to the final provocative thought for you to consider. If the pathway from a parent-child bond to a romantic partner bond is nonlinear, and if specific emotional skills like the ability to articulate complex feelings and process the past can mitigate early adversity, what role does active, conscious emotional effort play in shaping a truly secure connection, regardless of your history?
Think about the work required to shift from merely observing your emotional landscape to actively narrating it coherently.
That might just be the most powerful love tool you possess.